20 years from this exact morning, this same man would beg to die in a house that wasn't his. But right now, he didn't even know her name. The lobby of the Carrington Hotel went silent, except for one voice. A manager was shouting at a housekeeper in front of every guest checking in that morning. Her name was Grace Santos. She stood frozen, one hand on her son's shoulder, the other gripping her uniform like it was the only thing keeping her standing. 6-year-old Miguel pressed his face into his mother's apron, crying quietly. He had spent the whole night in the emergency room with an asthma attack, so bad the doctors almost admitted him. Grace had nowhere else to leave him. She brought him to work and hoped he could rest quietly in the staff room. The manager didn't care. He called her careless. He called her an embarrassment to the hotel. He waved for security to walk her out, right in front of everyone. That was when a young man stepped between them. His name was Ethan Carter, 32 years old, heir to one of the largest real estate empires in America. He said only one sentence: "If she loses her job today, you'll lose yours." Before we go further, like this video if you believe one small act of kindness can change a family forever. Subscribe if you want to see exactly what happened 20 years later. And drop Pinoy in the comments if you believe kindness always finds its way back. The lobby stayed silent. The manager's face went pale. He apologized to Grace on the spot and walked away without another word. Ethan knelt down so he was eye level with the crying little boy. "Your mother is one of the strongest people in this building," he said. "Never forget that." Miguel nodded through his tears, too young to understand what he had just witnessed. Ethan stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked out to his car waiting outside. He never told anyone what happened that morning. Grace never learned his full name. Neither of them imagined they would ever see each other again. Life simply moved forward, the way it does, carrying two strangers in completely different directions. Grace kept her job that day, but nothing else got easier. She worked 2 more jobs just to keep Miguel fed. Every night, tired to the bone, she told him the same thing. "One man's kindness changed our lives. Never waste it." She had no idea her son was already deciding what he wanted to become because of it. Miguel studied harder than anyone in his class, chasing scholarship after scholarship, until he was accepted into medical school. He chose the heart. When his mother asked why, out of every specialty, he only said, "Someone once told me you were the strongest person in a building. I want to know how hearts survive that." Ethan's world looked different from the outside. His company grew, his name appeared in magazines. What nobody saw was the business partner he trusted completely, quietly draining accounts for 3 straight years before disappearing with almost everything. By the time lawyers untangled it, there was barely enough left to keep his name on one building. His wife left before the company even finished collapsing. His daughter stopped answering his calls not long after. The last voicemail she ever left him was 6 words long. "I hope the money was worth it." He listened to it 11 times before he finally deleted it and never heard her voice again. Then came the diagnosis: a serious heart condition, delivered by a doctor at the only clinic he could still afford. Ethan sat in a waiting room that used to be filled with assistants and lawyers and realized there was no one left he could call with the news. He gave the intake nurse a name and nothing else. What Ethan didn't know was that his new case file had already crossed one particular cardiologist's desk. The doctor read Ethan Carter, formerly of Carrington Holdings, and sat very still for a long moment. He had heard that name exactly once before, 20 years ago, from his own mother at a hotel he was too young to remember clearly. He picked up his phone and called her before he even finished reading the chart. 20 years had passed since that morning in the lobby. Ethan now lived alone in a small rented apartment, the kind of place his old friends wouldn't have believed he'd accept. He had stopped opening his mail weeks ago. He had no idea that somewhere across the city, a phone call was already deciding what would happen to him next. One rainy afternoon, a knock came at his door. Ethan almost didn't answer. Knocks never meant anything good anymore, only bills or building notices. But something made him get up this time. He opened the door to a middle-aged Filipina woman holding a pot of homemade soup, steam still rising from the lid. Beside her stood a man in a white doctor's coat, calm and steady, like someone used to delivering difficult news gently. The woman smiled first. "Hello, Sir Ethan," she said. He stared at her for a long moment, searching a face that felt strangely familiar, though he could not place why. Then the doctor spoke. "You probably don't remember me." Ethan studied his face carefully. Something about the eyes tugged at a memory buried 20 years deep. "I do," he said slowly, though he wasn't sure yet if that was true or if he simply wanted it to be. "You told me my mother was the strongest person in the building," the doctor said quietly. Ethan's breath caught in his chest. The pieces arranged themselves all at once. The crying little boy, the shouting manager, the sentence he'd said and forgotten he'd ever spoken out loud. "Miguel," he whispered. Miguel nodded, smiling now. The same small smile he'd given as a 6-year-old, wiping tears from his cheeks. "I never forgot what you said to me that day," he told Ethan. "My mother made sure of that." Grace stood quietly in the doorway, holding the soup like it was the most natural gift in the world. Ethan didn't know what to say. 20 years of silence, of being forgotten, of feeling like nothing he had left mattered to anyone, and here stood two people who had carried him in their hearts the entire time without him ever knowing it. He stepped aside and let them in. Grace set the pot down on his small kitchen counter without asking permission, the way family does in a house they already consider their own. Miguel checked Ethan's medication schedule with the quiet efficiency of a man who had learned to care for people long before he learned to diagnose them. They began visiting every day after that. Grace cooked. Miguel took over his treatment personally, refusing to let anyone else touch the chart. 3 weeks in, Ethan finally snapped at them both. "Stop," he said, harder than he meant to. "You don't owe me anything. I was a stranger who said one sentence 20 years ago. Stop acting like I'm family." The room went quiet. Grace set down her spoon. "You stopped being a stranger the day you knelt down for my son," she said. "You just weren't there to see the 20 years after." He didn't argue with her again. Every Sunday after that, he went to church with them, if only because staying home alone had started to feel worse than showing up. Afterward came lunches too crowded for the table, karaoke that never quite worked, children weaving between chairs. Nobody there asked what he used to be worth. They only noticed whether he came back the following week. He always did. Grace invited him to visit her family in Leyte that spring. Ethan hesitated, unsure what a man with nothing left could offer people who already had less than he did. Grace just smiled. "You gave Miguel a future once," she said. "Come see where it started." In Leyte, Ethan met Grace's elderly parents, who welcomed him the way you welcome someone who has been away too long, not someone new. Neighbours shared food with him even though their own plates were never full. He had spent his whole life believing wealth was something you built alone and protected carefully. Then a typhoon hit the coast 3 days into his visit, tearing roofs off small houses up and down the barangay. The next morning, without anyone calling a single meeting, the entire community showed up with hammers and spare wood, moving from house to house until every roof was fixed. No one kept count of whose house got fixed first. Ethan picked up a hammer himself, hands shaking, blistering within the hour. When he dropped a nail, for the 3rd time, an old man beside him just bent down, picked it up, and pressed it back into his palm without a word. Ethan finally asked Grace's father why everyone worked this hard for people who could never repay them. The old farmer wiped sweat from his forehead and smiled at the question like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Because storms never choose one house," he said. Ethan turned the sentence over in his mind for the rest of that day, and for many days afterward. It was the truest thing anyone had told him in 20 years. Back in America, Ethan checked what he still legally owned. One asset remained, untouched, through the entire collapse. His stake in the Carrington Hotel itself, the same building where he'd once knelt down for a crying 6-year-old. He sold it. Every dollar went into scholarships for children of overseas Filipino workers and emergency housing funds for storm-prone communities, exactly like Grace's. He refused to attach his own name to any of it. Every building, every scholarship letter, every plaque carried only one name: the Santos Family Foundation. A reporter finally tracked him down and asked why, after everything he'd built in his life, he hadn't used his own name even once. Ethan thought about it for a moment. "My name built hotels," he said. "Theirs built me back." It felt like the easier decision, honestly. Years passed. Ethan's heart condition slowly worsened despite Miguel's careful treatment. When the end finally came close, Ethan made one request. He did not want to spend his final days in a private hospital surrounded by machines and strangers. He wanted to go back to Leyte one last time. Grace's family welcomed him exactly as they always had, without ceremony, without treating him like a dying man instead of family. He spent his last weeks on the same porch where he'd once learned to mend a roof, listening to the same rooster crow every morning at the same impossible hour. He passed away peacefully in Grace's family home, her hand in his on one side, Dr. Miguel's hand steady on the other. Just before closing his eyes, Ethan whispered one final sentence. "I thought I saved your family." Grace smiled through her tears and shook her head gently. "No, sir," she said softly. "You simply refused to look away." On the small kitchen counter back in that first apartment, an empty soup pot still sat where Grace had left it years earlier, never returned, never needed to be. In a drawer nearby, a single bent nail from that Leyte rooftop, kept for no reason anyone could explain. And on the porch, in Leyte, 2 hands, one young, one old, holding on until the very last moment. The rest, as Grace always said, was love.